When you suggested this whole deep dive on Indra Nooyi, I gotta be honest, my first thought was Pepsi, really. But then I started going through these sources, and man, her journey from Madras to becoming this global CEO, it's pretty amazing.
It really is. And we hear about humble beginnings all the time. But with Nui, it wasn't just about, limited means. There's the traditional Tamil Brahmin household, the focus on education, even something like the competitiveness of playing cricket. All these things really mattered.
So it's like, yeah, it wasn't just about getting good grades, right? It was about this drive to be the best, but within the specific cultural context.
Exactly.
So she goes from Madras Christian College, tackling physics and chemistry, then on to IIM Calcutta, one of India's top business schools. It's not like she's got PepsiCo in her sights at this point. It's more about building this incredible foundation.
Yeah, and this is where things get really interesting. Because instead of just launching her career in India, she makes a huge leap, heads to Yale for a master's in public and private management. I mean, think about that for a second. She's actively choosing to, immerse herself in a whole different world, a different way of thinking about business, about leadership.
It's almost like she knew that to lead globally, she had to understand the U.S. market from the inside out. And Yale, talk about aiming high. It wasn't just about the degree, but the connections, the exposure to all these different ideas and perspectives.
Absolutely. And that's something you see throughout her career. Every choice, even the ones that seem a little unexpected at first, like her background in science, they all become part of this larger strategy.
Oh, I like that.
It's about connecting those dots, understanding how all these different experiences, they bring something valuable to the table. So it's 1994, and she walks into PepsiCo with all this experience under her belt, ready to take on the world. But like you said, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing from day one, was it?
Not even close. I mean, the sources paint this really vivid picture, right? Intense rivalry. And not just with Coca-Cola, which everyone kind of expects. There's this growing awareness of just how bad sugary drinks are for you. Can you imagine that pressure? To lead a company built on soda towards a future where soda might not be, the king of the beverage aisle anymore?
It's a huge challenge, and that's where, if you remember, performance with a purpose comes in. And this wasn't just some empty marketing slogan for Nui. She understood that to really thrive, PepsiCo had to stand for something bigger.
Okay, so it's about more than just profits at this point, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Think about the context for a second. Environmentalism. Not nearly as mainstream back then as it is now. And here you have PepsiCo investing in things like reducing their water usage during manufacturing, developing biodegradable packaging. They weren't just reacting to consumer demand. They were trying to get ahead of the curve, trying to shape it.
And it's not just about being green either, right? I mean, the sources talk about how employee well-being is a core part of this whole performance with a purpose idea.
Oh, absolutely. Nui really understood that a company is only as good as its people.
All right.
So under her leadership, you start to see a real shift and increased focus on work-life balance, on diversity initiatives, creating a more inclusive workplace. This wasn't just about good PR. It was about attracting and retaining the best talent.
It's like she's playing chess, and everyone else is still trying to figure out checkers.
Yep.
But this is also where you really see her business smarts in action. We can't forget about the huge acquisitions she made during her time at the top. Tropicana, Quaker Oats, Naked Juice. These were not random choices.
No, not at all. These acquisitions, they were calculated strategic moves. She recognized that consumer tastes were changing, that people wanted healthier options. And instead of trying to force-fit PepsiCo into that mold, she went out and brought in brands that already embodied that shift.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like she understood that sometimes to really lead a company into the future, you have to let go of the past, or at least parts of it. And speaking of letting go, that brings us to maybe the biggest, boldest move of her time at PepsiCo. Spinning off the entire restaurant division.
Huge.
KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell. These weren't just brands, right? These were woven into the fabric of American culture. Letting go of all that. That couldn't have been easy, even for someone like Indra Nooyi.
Oh, it was a tough call for sure. A lot of people, they saw those restaurants as the heart and soul of PepsiCo.
Yeah.
But, Nooyi always had this knack for seeing the bigger picture. She realized that holding on to them, even if they were doing okay in the moment, it was holding PepsiCo back from reaching its full potential.
So it was less about streamlining and more about focus.
Exactly. Letting go of the restaurants gave her the freedom to really double down on where PepsiCo was already headed. Snacks, beverages, that whole performance with a purpose philosophy. It allowed her to really sharpen that message. inside and outside the company.
And, I mean, you can't argue with the results. Under her leadership, PepsiCo's revenue, it just exploded. $63.5 billion. That's not just success, that's a whole other level.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
But what I find really interesting is that Nooyi's impact, it goes way beyond the balance sheet, right?
It really does. I mean, think about it. Indra Nooyi, a woman, an immigrant, leading one of the most recognizable companies on the planet, during a time when those were still pretty big obstacles in the corporate world.
And she didn't just overcome these obstacles, she basically kicked the door open for everyone behind her, mentoring women in business, showing them that they could reach that top spot too.
That's huge. I mean, can you imagine the inspiration, right? To see someone who looks like you, who comes from a similar background, actually breaking through those glass ceilings. That kind of representation, it goes beyond the business world. It sends a message about what's possible.
You know, going through all these sources, I kept wondering what's next for someone like her. Turns out I wasn't the only one. There were all these rumors floating around about her maybe getting into politics after PepsiCo.
Interesting.
Right.
Performance with a purpose?
Bruh.
On a whole new level. That's a pretty interesting thought, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, it makes you think about the role business leaders play in shaping the world around them. And when someone like Indra Nooyi decides to step onto a bigger stage, well, who knows what could happen. Definitely something to keep an eye on.